Dear participants, good morning from Lisbon. Welcome to the second day of the UN Portugal Policy Symposium, preparatory of the high-level conference on management and sustainability of outer space activities to be held in person in Lisbon 14 and 15 of May. Yesterday, we had a full day and we discussed the regional and national approaches on space sustainability, taking on board several key words or key concepts, such as cooperation, time to action, the burden sharing, and sustainability not only on space, but also on Earth. Today, we have another full day ahead of us with two wonderful sessions on space debris. And to lead us in the beginning of our works of the day, we have Dr. Umamaheswaran, Chair of the COPUS Working Group on the Long-Term Sustainability of Outer Space Activities. He is a domain expert in the field of launch vehicle system, electrical integration, checkout, ground station, avionics system engineering, as well as in space policy planning. Holding a PhD in electronics and communication, he works at the Indian Space Research Organization and, amongst other immense tasks, he worked within the Vikram Sarabhai Space Center, was ISRO's scientific secretary, and was also director of Human Space Flight Center. Dr. Umamaheswaran, thank you so much for accepting the invitation to moderate the first session on space debris, and the floor is yours.
So again, thanks, Carolina, and a very good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. It is afternoon in Bangalore here. First of all, let me thank the management of Portuguese Space Agency, along with UNUSA, for inviting me and making me a part of this very important virtual symposium on policy and regulations, preceding the high-level conference of management and sustainability of space activities to be held in Lisbon on 14th and 15th of May 2024, as just now Carolina told. This virtual symposium, as I understand, is divided into three topics, namely the space debris, the space resources, and the space traffic management, covering all the areas indicated in the space policy brief of the UN Secretary General. So today, the second day of this program, our session is on space debris, as you know, as part of Group 1. We have with us four distinguished speakers on this subject: Aya Iwamoto, Giovani C. Concepcion, Hristina Talkova, and Hamza Hamid. So we have, as Carolina indicated, around 1 hour for this session. I suggest that each speaker of the panel may spend around, let us say, 7 to 8 minutes on the subject that he or she is dwelling upon. After the completion of the talk by all the four, we may get around 20 to 25 minutes of time, which can be effectively utilized for interactions and discussions. I'm sure Carolina and her team will lead us through that session with regard to these interactions. So without much ado, let me call upon the first speaker of today's panel, Ms. Aya Iwamoto, the Vice President, Policy and Government Relation, Astroscale Japan in Japan. And I understand she's talking about transforming the future of space economy and sustainability through on-orbit servicing, focusing specifically on Astroscale Japan's efforts through the mission Address J. Over to you, Aya.
Thank you. Am I sharing my screen with everyone? Can everyone see my slides?
Yes, it's perfect. Thank you.
Okay, I'm just going to use the PDF just in case. So thank you very much, Dr. Umamaheswaran. And I would like to also express my gratitude to the organizers, the Portuguese Space Agency and UNUSA, for inviting me to engage in today's intrigue conversation. So What we are currently observing is, so today's topic is about space debris, and we are witnessing exponential increase in the number of objects in low Earth orbit, particularly within commercial satellite constellation, and this trend is expected to persist. And there are approximately 35,000 debris objects tracked by SSA and maintained in the catalog, which means there are more numbers of smaller objects untrackable. And collision involving non-maneuverable upper stages and spacecrafts are anticipated to become the predominant source of new debris. And there was a reported near-miss cases in February involving two non-functioning satellites, Russian satellites and NASA satellites, with a separation about 20 meters. There was merely a stroke of luck that these two large objects did not collide. And I understand that ESA's annual space environment report points out the adoption of space debris mitigation measures is improving, but given the sheer number of new satellites and amount of existing debris, the rate is still not enough, and our behavior in space appears to be unsustainable in the long term. So we must both prevent and cure. An IADC statement of active debris removal issued in 2022 points out that prioritizing and properly balancing mitigation and remediation will be a key to manage the long-term orbital debris problem in a cost-effective manner. So in this regard, I would like to share with you on Astroscale Japan's effort on space debris remediation, the mission called ADRAS-J. And the ADRAS-J spacecraft has been chosen by JAXA for phase 1 of its commercial debris removal demonstration program, known as CRD2 program. And this initiative is led by JAXA, focusing on demonstrating technology for removing large-scale debris from orbit through collaboration with the private sector. And Astroscale Japan has been selected as commercial partner of the phase 1 of this program. And the primary goal of phase 1 involving approaching, observing, inspecting, and flying around the Japanese upper stage rocket body, a Japanese H-2A rocket that launched in 2009, as you can see in this slide. And these activities are crucial steps in laying out the groundwork for future debris removal operations. And you can see the scope of the mission in the slide. And the phase 2 of the CRD2, although yet to be contracted, is envisioned to encompass the capture and removal of space debris, which I believe from JAXA's homepage. And this ADRAS-J spacecraft for phase 1 of the CRD2 has been successfully launched by Rocket Lab from New Zealand on February 18. And the satellite has actually initiated a rendezvous operation phase on February 22nd. And as you, I think here today, there are policy experts watching this, and everyone knows and understands there are numerous challenges associated with the realizing ADR from technology, economics, and legal or policy issues. And in this context, the importance of ADRAS-J mission extends beyond mere technological demonstration, but also plays a crucial role in showcasing a safe and transparent operational practices that is vital for future development of commercial on-orbit services. And this perspective actually encompasses consideration from policy, legal, and business standpoints. And particularly, as you can see in this slide, there are sort of, in order to achieve space sustainability, we believe that there are 3 pillars needs to be resolved. And given the dual-use nature of on-orbit servicing capability, or as UniDual terms call it, dual-purpose nature, it becomes crucial to differentiate and clearly define what constitutes safe and transparent rendezvous and proximity operations. And this distinction is very paramount in establishing trust on commercial RPO. So commercial space actors must prioritize transparency in their activities, showcasing their commitment to space sustainability and safety. And this involves voluntarily adopting best practices that go beyond regulatory minimum whenever feasible. And development of industry best practices and standards, especially our own norms, is pivotal in this endeavor. And for ADRAS-J missions, as you can see in this slide, we believe that this mission stands out one of the pioneering commercial mission licensed based on specific requirements for on-orbit servicing. As you can see, we have obtained a mission license from Japan based on specific guidelines for on-orbit servicing, as well as a payload license from New Zealand, which adheres to on-orbit servicing mission operational policy. And we have also contributed and provided inputs and views to regulatory bodies during the development of these guidelines. And some of our inputs based on operational guidelines and practices developed by industry group called Converse. So we hope these guidelines would serve for shaping the future practices and norms for safe and transparent commercial on-orbit servicing. And lastly, sorry for taking such a long time, economics of ADR, or how to make ADR commercially viable for commercial companies, still faces some challenges, mainly due to the issue of space debris is under the realm of so-called tragedy of commons, which requires, I think, a lot of work in policy and legal work. And that's why I think this panel and workshop is very important in this regard. And at the same time, currently major space agencies such as ESA or JAXA are actively engaged in research and development for ADR technology or missions, such as ESA's Clean Space Initiative or JAXA's CRD2 program. And we expect that these ongoing missions will pave the way for practical solutions. And it is a source of a great pleasure for us too to contribute the global efforts aimed at preserving Earth orbits for present and future generations. And lastly, space debris are challenges at global level. So it entails complex issues, but I think it's very important for us. We can always start from the local level, whatever we can do for a practical solutions to the issues. And here, collaboration is always the key. Therefore, I really appreciate the Portuguese Space Agency for convening this symposium workshop. So with that, I finish my presentation, and over to you, Dr. Maheswaran.
Thank you very much, Eva. A fascinating project address J indeed. Our next speaker, let us proceed to our next speaker, Mr. Giovani C. Concepcion, who is Attorney Space Policy and Legal Affairs Division, Philippine Space Agency. And he is also the Chief Legal Officer of PhilSA, Philippine Space Agency, which provides support for policy review and formulation, legislative liaison, and legal services. He also teaches at the Philippine Law School. So he is going to talk about the Philippine experience on space debris, particularly those that fall within the Philippine waters. So over to you, Giovani.
Hello. Yes, are you seeing my screen, Dr.
Yeah,
Umamaheswaran?
I can
All right.
see. I can see the
All right. So, first of all, I would like to thank the organizers of this UN Portugal Symposium on the management and sustainability of space activities. So, I'd like to thank you for inviting me to speak in this panel. And I would also like to thank you, Dr. Umamaheswaran, for your kind introduction. So before I go to my presentation, I'd like to give a brief introduction of the Philippine Space Agency. So we are actually created by virtue of national legislation, which created also our space policy. So by that legislation, the PhilSA became the central government agency in the Philippines, addressing all national issues and activities in space science and technology applications. PhilSA is actually attached in the Office of the President for purposes of policy and program coordination, and to ensure alignment in national policies and priorities. Under the space policy of the Philippines, we have 6 major key development areas, that is the national security and development, hazard management and climate studies, space research and development, space industry capacity building, space education and awareness, and international cooperation. We have an overall advisory body, which is the Philippine Space Council, which is in charge of the coordination, integration of policies, program, and resources affecting the space science and technology applications of the Philippines. So this is chaired by the President of the Philippines with vice chairpersons from our science and technology and national defense. Our Director General of the Philippine Space Agency serves as the presidential advisor on space matters and the Secretariat of the Philippine Space Council. So I would like to talk on the Philippine experience on debris, space debris. So as we all know, the utilization of space-related technologies and applications hold an important contribution to our world. It allowed people in remote areas to access the internet. It likewise improved weather forecasting, navigation, and environmental monitoring, which has become deeply integrated into our daily lives. This and future progress, however, faces a significant threat from space debris. These are non-functional spacecraft, launch vehicle stages, defunct satellites, and fragments including paint flecks, which are considered junk and no longer serve any use. The amount of space debris in orbit has steadily increasing, and debris travels at speeds faster than a bullet, posing dangers both in space and in Earth. In space, there is danger for possible collisions and increasing the instability of of debris environment and operational risk to satellite. In Earth, the debris may burn up in the atmosphere, and large fragments could land on shallow waters, causing damages, maybe to corals or marine life. The Philippines recognizes space debris as a global concern that requires urgent attention and proactive management. Thus, we support the implementation of the guidelines for long-term sustainability of outer space activities, the Space 2030 Agenda, and other relevant debris mitigation guidelines sanctioned by the United Nations. As a nation with limited space capability, the Philippines has encountered instances of falling debris within or near its territorial waters, often associated with the rising frequency of rocket launches. As you can see in my screen, since 2022, we have been a recipient of falling debris from rocket launches. We have one in December 17, 2022, another one on June 2023, and the most recent is on March 2, 2024. These are usually within or near our territorial waters or often wash on shore. And as a part of our response, the Philippines to the Philippine Space Council adopted Resolution Number 5, Series of 2021, that paved the way for the creation of a technical working group on orbital debris protocols. The TWG serves as an advisory body for the coordination, discussion, formulation, and integration of strategies, protocols, guidelines, and similar mechanisms that will promote and ensure appropriate rocket launches and other outer space activities that will pose risk to the Philippines and the region. The TWG is chaired by the PhilSA's Space Technology Missions and Systems Bureau with the following member agencies: our Department of Foreign Affairs, our Department of National Defense, National Mapping and Resource Information Authority, National Security Council, Office of the Civil Defense, Civil Aviation Authority of the Philippines, and the Department of Interior and Local Government. The expected output of this TWG includes a final report containing recommendations on the protocols and standard operating procedures that will serve as a guide for the country in preventing and responding to possible risks brought about by rocket launches, space debris, space object collisions, and similar scenarios, and recommendations and identification of agencies and institutions, permanent bodies that will coordinate and implement protocols and policies that are developed. This is actually our approach for a whole government to establish a proactive response in addressing space debris issues in the country. The TWG work is a work in progress, but since its establishment, we have actively tackled common ground-based issues. However, we are still confronted with unprecedented challenges from space debris generated by other countries' space activities. Thus, we have another response, and that is to actively go into international representation and call for action. To respond in this possible danger, the Philippines actively engages in various forums. We acknowledge the ongoing necessity for close coordination with other nations concerning space endeavors that could potentially endanger our country. We actively participated in the UN Caucus and its subcommittee meetings, where we consistently advocate for adherence to debris mitigation measures. We also participated in the sessions of the open-ended working group on reducing space threats, where we submitted a working paper with Germany on recommendations on possible norms, rules, and principles of responsible behaviors relating to threats by states to space systems. In this working paper, we identified as a principle of responsible behavior the considerations regarding launching of missiles and space launch vehicles. States should conduct launches of missiles and space launch vehicles in a way that ensures to the greatest extent as possible and feasible maximum the safe and secure operation of satellites and crewed space stations and other space systems. When launching space launch vehicles, the launching state should issue pre-launch notifications and conduct prior coordination with potentially affected countries, including those identified as potential drop zones of re-entering debris, such as the rocket stages that we just saw in my previous slide from that launch that pose. In addition, to support the space debris mitigation efforts, our agency spearheaded a space situational awareness training workshop in collaboration with the European Space Agency and JAXA, the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency. During the workshop, experts shared insight into space situational awareness using software tools for debris risk assessment, mitigation, and collision avoidance, among others, as topics. Additionally, as a member of the ASEAN, or the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, the Philippines actively engages in initiatives to promote space cooperation within the region. We have also hosted and participated in a regional workshop on space situational awareness and traffic management, resulting in the development of a concept note endorsed to the ASEAN Committee of Science and Technology and Innovation. We therefore encourage other countries engaged in space activities to enhance transparency and strictly adhere to the established UN regulations on mitigating space debris. We support the active collaboration of governments and private entities and organizations in addressing these concerns, and we are hopeful that this initiative will facilitate continued conversations and dialogue focused on effectively tackling space debris issue. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Giovani, for bringing out the issues that you are facing with respect to the debris issue in Philippines and the kind of proactive actions that you are taking. So let us move over to the next speaker. We have Hristina Talkova, the Executive Officer at European Center for Space Law, and she will be talking about ECSL as a platform within ESA to coordinate the legal and policy considerations for European space activities, highlighting some of the occasions where the topic of space debris was discussed, as well as ESA's work on debris mitigation and remediation, and also zero debris approach. So over to Hristina.
Thank you so much. Can I just check if I'm audible? Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. So without taking too much time now in the beginning, I would
Hristina,
like
you have to raise your volume. It's a bit low. Sorry.
How about now?
And getting better.
Okay, I would be afraid of trying to switch the microphone.
No, but now it's okay. Thank you.
So let's
Yeah, thank you.
In this way, I hope that this is audible enough.
No, it is. Thank you.
Yes, of course. To reiterate very briefly, I will try to talk about two parts in this short introduction. On the one hand, you will surely, in the course of this whole symposium, which is very generously organized by the Portuguese Space Agency and by UNOSA, you will see a lot of my colleagues from the European Space Agency that are more technical experts, where they will share their knowledge. So I will not try to replicate that, but I just wanted to use two anecdotes now in the beginning from their side that I think might be interesting also from the policy perspective. On the one hand, Aya already said it. I mean, we have a really rising number of space objects being launched in outer space. That is not a secret, so I'm not going to dwell too much on that. But from the ESA Environmental Report, which is an annual publication and shares a lot of data, the last year had something which I found quite interesting, so I want to briefly quote it, and that our experts from the Space Debris Office say that we expect to have in the next 3 years more space objects launched into outer space than in the last 60 years. So just to put into perspective maybe why we are trying to talk about space debris mitigation and remediation and active debris removal. And then to come back to the European Space Agency and its efforts towards that as a first kind of technological setup. ESA has been involved in the Interagency Debris Coordination Committee for quite some time from its inception, and it has from the beginning advocated for space debris mitigation to be put in these different international and regional fora. And what I think is sometimes not known outside or not known to the classic space law and policy circles is that ESA has for a very long time had administrative instructions, which are of course not international instruments, but they are legal internal instruments that are binding on the agency itself and on its missions that actually duplicate a lot of the space debris mitigation efforts that are simply non-binding in the international fora. And when I started working here 2.5 years ago, I still remember this discussion with a technical colleague. He works for the Future Launchers Preparatory Program. So basically, he really looks at technology for the future. And he, you know, when he asked, what is space law and policy? What do you guys do? And we said, well, you know, we have these types of things. We also have space debris mitigation. And he said, but why do you need to discuss that? That's clear. We have it's legally binding. We solved that. I'm like, but what do you mean? Because for him, as an engineer working at ESA, he has, you know, we discussed this on the global scale, but for him, he has a legally binding instruction and standards he has to apply. So for him, it was clear, like, oh, this matter is settled. Like, we're going forward. And that is not to say that we're not obviously trying to update that as much as possible and trying to discuss new methods. That is, of course, the case. But I just wanted to put this a bit into perspective. Of course, we have to discuss it, but for some people working on their fields, you know, they sometimes have a ceiling already. And to bring maybe very briefly an introduction to the European Centre for Space Law, what it tries to do is operating within ESA. It tries to really put this legal and policy perspective into all of these technical work that is being done by our colleagues. And we've had this since 1989, so quite for a long time. We have tried to involve mostly in the regional sector in Europe, but also with international partners. We've tried to offer capacity building initiatives and also just discussion opportunities on how to go forward in these matters. And especially in the topic of space debris, we have had a couple of activities in the past as well, working directly with our colleagues from the Operations Directorate at ESA. So our colleagues that house the space debris office, they have all the technical capabilities and they have models, they have their analytics that they share with us in that sense, lawyers or policymakers, and they try to make us understand. And to bring those two together, starting off already before COVID, before the pandemic, it was the intention to try to create a roundtable annually to discuss space debris matters. Unfortunately, since COVID came in between, we have not been able to continue that, but we have an attempt going forward from last year where we had a policy discussion on non-legally binding instruments and how they can foster that type of development, as to having multiple workshops and seminars this year, both for really practitioners, high-level people in industry that work and actually apply these standards, to really, you know, the entry-level colleagues, you know, the junior professionals that want to share their expertise in that regard. And maybe to briefly highlight the zero debris approach, which is also something that is developed by our colleagues in the Protect Accelerator, and which I, with a legal background, find quite fascinating, the way that they really quickly try to turn around and set that up. That is to say, the zero debris approach is not an ESA initiative as such. It's not an ESA-led thing, and it's not supposed to be, but the initial push to bring stakeholders together and to really discuss on that instrument is what really, for me, it made it very special when they presented us with that idea. And I think that a lot of the times we have bilateral or regional instruments introduced into the whole, introduced to UN COPUS, of course, but they are often really created by one stakeholder and they're pushed forward, and they're already put as a complete thing on the table, and then said, okay, would you like to go forward with me this initiative or not? And the zero debris charter, as it currently stands in its draft zero, it was developed with a lot of stakeholders from within Europe, but I believe also from outside, that were the ones that will have to, in the end, apply that document. They're the ones that will need to be involved in its actual application, and they were put in a room together multiple times, both online and both in person, and they discussed it in a similar way as COPUS discussed its reports. You know, you put it on the screen and you say, okay, let's now discuss the wording and how we go forward. And I think that as maybe a setup for this whole discussion, especially in the topic, I think, of space debris, where the technical understanding is so important, I think that showing that not only to governments and to those in UN Corpus who, of course, will ultimately maybe take this discussion up to the higher level, it is really important to understand and to make that bridge between the technical understanding and what we do with it and how can we go forward. And in Europe, we also have, of course, initiatives by the European Commission in that regard, and we have different pushes currently to try to go beyond what is currently necessary. I do think that going forward in that sense, especially for space debris, I hope that it will be the most easy topic when you put it to other things that are being discussed on the international level, not to name any, but I think that this is something that everyone can at least agree on, that we really need to act, and we need to act fast. Also, as Aya said, there are these really close calls with that all the time. And I think that I myself don't follow it as nearly because it's not part of my daily work. At ECSL, as I mentioned, we're more there to analyze and to put people together. But I think that there is a lot of those that are not always publicized, they're not always put there because there would be too many, simply. And once something happens, it will be too late. And as not to quote the European Commission when they talk about other initiatives, but we need this yesterday. We need a discussion on this. We would have needed it 10 years ago. Of course, it was already happening, but not at this magnitude. So I hope I was able to give a brief introduction on my perspective and what we do. And I would be happy, of course, to answer any questions later on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hristina, for making us aware, as you rightly said, on the debris coordination efforts that ESA does, especially what ECSL is doing. So thank you very much on that. We'll go to the last speaker of this particular session, Hamza Hamid, who leads the chair of the Space Generation Advisory Council, SGAC, and senior practice manager for space policy at Access Partnership. He is also a member of ITU Secretary General's Youth Advisory Board. He is also a member of the International Institute of Space Law, IISL, and he is going to talk about SGAC as a voice of next-gen space programs, highlighting SGAC's work in the area of policy and advocacy. And interestingly, is also addressing the Intergenerational Pact for Space Sustainability, focusing on multilateral collaboration and cooperation in the area of space debris. Very fascinating. Over to you, Hamza.
Thank you very much, Dr. Umamaheswaran, and thank you to the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs, as well as the Portuguese Space Agency, for their very kind invitation to me and to the Space Generation Advisory Council to be present at this fantastic event, talking about the importance of space sustainability, and in particular, space debris. As was kindly mentioned, among the various hats that I wear, I'm presently serving as the chair of the Space Generation Advisory Council, which is a permanent observer to the United Nations Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, and was established at the Unispace +3 conference back in 1999 to serve as a voice for young people, for the youth, and for the youth from all parts of the world that are involved in the space sector, and to really carry forward and present to the UN, to space agencies, and to industry the policy positions and perspectives that young people have on issues related to space, and in particular with a focus on space sustainability. This year, SGAC marks its 25th anniversary, so we've been around for a long time, and we've been contributing to the UN ever since. Our network now represents more than 29,000 volunteers from more than 165 countries, with lots of groups all around the world that get together for events, project groups, research, and activities. SGAC is very active in the area of policy and advocacy, particularly with a view towards space sustainability. 2 years ago, we formalized the Space Generation Advocacy and Policy Platform, or SGAPP, which consolidates the views of young people from all across our organization into specific policy positions and overviews that we then present to the United Nations, to space agencies, and at regional and local events. Last year, the Advocacy and Policy Platform produced what was just described, an intergenerational pact for space sustainability, which is a document entirely focused on recognizing the importance space sustainability plays, particularly for future generations. One key reason for the publication of this timely document was to contribute to the United Nations work as part of the Summit of the Future and as part of the Declaration of Future Generations. This intergenerational pact for space sustainability was officially presented to the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space at the 61st session of the Scientific and Technical Subcommittee held in February, with the kind support of the Office of Outer Space Affairs, as well as the government of Austria, as well as other delegations that joined. We're also very grateful to the Portuguese Space Agency for their kind support for our work. This intergenerational pact essentially focuses on 5 areas. It focuses on multilateral governance and youth participation. So it highlights the need for increased participation in space governance frameworks and meaningful engagement of youth in international forums related to space. It prioritizes international collaboration, whereby it calls for enhanced information sharing and capacity building in space law and policy, ensuring that emerging nations particularly can actively contribute to the sustainable use of space. It looks at space traffic management and emphasizes the importance of adopting and enforcing standards and best practices for space traffic management and space situational awareness in order to promote space sustainability. It has an entire section on space debris, which I'll talk a little about later on, that advocates for the development of norms and technologies for the incremental removal of space debris and ensuring that space activities are conducted with long-term sustainability already in mind. And then it looks at sustainability beyond Earth orbit. So given that it's the perspective of the next generation, we foresee space not just space sustainability, not just from a lower Earth orbit or an Earth orbit perspective, but also looks at sustainability with regard to issues such as space resources, the exploration of different celestial bodies, and deep space exploration. Specifically on the topic of space debris, the Intergenerational Pact on Space Sustainability recognizes the growing threat that space debris poses. I think this is not news to anyone on this call. Aya quite correctly pointed out more than 35,000 objects that are large objects that are orbiting our Earth at the moment that pose risks to all sorts of functioning space assets at the moment. I think over the course of its lifetime, the International Space Station has had to perform more than 30 collision avoidance maneuvers, with quite a few of them just having been taken place last year. Additionally, if you look at the statistics for how many collision avoidance maneuvers satellites in lower Earth orbit or Sentinel satellites particularly have had to perform in the recent past, the number is quite large and is continuously growing and will continue to grow with the large number of space assets that will be launched in the near future. This level of environmental pollution represents a significant risk and threatens the safety and viability of space exploration, scientific research, and at the end impacts the economic value that the next generation will be able to derive from space applications. And this is something that IPAS is really worried about, and the next generation is really worried about. The document identifies an urgent need for mitigation and puts the burden on all stakeholders and actors that are participating in the global space economy to prioritize space debris mitigation. The document is very much aligned with the long-term sustainability guidelines of the United Nations and also focuses on the IADC space debris guidelines as then supported by the UN Space Debris Mitigation Guidelines, which we sincerely think must be translated into best practices and norms for behavior and responsible behavior in the area of outer space. Of course, new technologies such as active debris removal, space traffic management, and space situational awareness will play a key role in addressing the problem of space sustainability and making sure space is more sustainable in the long term. At the same time, we firmly believe that sustainability has to be by design, and the reduction of space debris has to be a conscious choice rather than a problem to be fixed later on. And as such, this proactive approach towards space debris mitigation, whereby space agencies all around the world think of rules and regulations such as mandatory deorbiting guidelines, end-of-life plans, and missions for all space operators within their jurisdiction, as well as a vision and view towards collaboration and data sharing, is how SGAC thinks a united effort can be put forward towards developing and implementing global standards and achieving space sustainability for all. We firmly think that space sustainability is a key issue for the next generation, and in order to ensure that spaces continue to be accessible for future generations, we need to be mindful of the problem of space debris, which is why I'm delighted to see all the people here at this table and at the upcoming events in preparation for the Summit of the Future, where space sustainability and space debris will generally be prioritized and discussed and will be highlighted as an important issue that the global community needs to unite behind. So I'm really excited to see what comes next from the UN on how to prioritize space sustainability, and would really like to thank the Portuguese Space Agency for being a champion in this regard and furthering work on the issue of space sustainability. I'm happy to answer any questions anyone might have, and thanks again for your time.
Thank you very much, Hamza. So I think we have come to an end of presentations as such. Just to summarize, I think we had very fascinating 4 different talks with 4 different perspectives on the same issue of space debris. Maybe Aya was concentrating on the active debris removal with the very fascinating project of Address J. Maybe a lot of questions may be there coming for that. Giovani was explaining the actual real consequences and the issues that are faced by the debris by the country and the kind of proactive responses that the country has taken. Very interesting. And Hristina was talking about the overall coordination efforts, specifically what ECSL is doing with respect to this particular aspect. And Hamza gave a very nice introduction, I would say, with respect to the role that SGAC plays. Especially, he was talking, I think he was hinting on the activities with the next gen needs to do. I think that is very fascinating. A lot of evolving things are coming, which I think we need to take further. So I think we have around 15 minutes of time for discussions. So the floor is open for discussions. I have one question already. Just 1 minute. There is one question which is rather a little bit vague, which is addressed to Iwa from one Ginis Afonso Ribeiro. So he is talking about re-entering all of the ISS or building a salvage yard in space. Has Astroscale studied the possibility repurpose major structural parts of the International Space Station? I think he is talking about the oncoming or the future re-entry aspects of ISS. Are you planning a salvage yard for that, or are you trying to repurpose or reuse? I think that's what I understand. So over to Aya for your comments on that.
So thank you for the question, and specifically for the decommissioning, re-entering the IAS. need to check with the engineers, but I'm not sure we do have specific discussion on it. But as a concept, I think on overservicing or ISAM companies has been talking about repurposing or recycling or manufacturing in space. So I think the concepts are there. So it is a matter of time. Yeah, I think, and it's really important that what we are telling people is that we need to bring the circular economy or recycling or after services, which does exist on the ground but doesn't exist in space. So I think we're expecting exciting time. And I'm sorry I cannot answer for specifically about Astroscale, but I hope that this answer will serve the question. I mean, answer some parts. Thank you.
Thank you, Aya. I think I hope he is satisfied. There is another question, Harold Safari. Could you advise on the type of telescope I would need to purchase to track debris and where to get them? And added to that, how practical is it to use black holes as dumping sites by redirecting the debris? A very interesting suggestion. Yeah, I think anybody can answer this. I don't think it is directed to a specific person.
I think we're all policy people here, so I certainly can't. So I struggle to.
Probably I will try to give.
Yeah, you can answer.
I may not be able to answer, but I can give a lead. Basically, as far as the first question is concerned, could you advise on the type of telescope I would need to purchase to track the debris, where to get them? So probably, I think the internationally there are many agencies who are making the telescopes. I think if you scan through, you will get the details and the kind of telescope that is also required, because basically there are two aspects. One is the low Earth orbit kind of debris that is going around, as well as the distant debris. So we need different types of instruments, different type of resolutions. And whether to use optical or radar, that also needs to be answered. So there are different methods, and there are a number of providers who are making this, be in the RF field or in the optical field, like as you said, telescopes. So maybe you can contact them. I think it's available. And coming to the next question, practically I don't know. I really don't know how to use black holes at dumping sites. Really, that's a thing which needs to be pondered. How to accelerate and send them so that they can fall into the black hole. I really don't know. But it's a very fascinating kind of thought process. Probably it can be taken up further. You yourself can take it further. Definitely, there will be listeners, especially space science people who are basically into this. They may be able to give a better answer. That's what I think.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I might add here is that you don't necessarily need to get your own telescope. There are various agencies, particularly databases that NASA and ESA maintain quite regularly, that track space debris. And if there are particular types of or sizes of debris that you're interested in, you can certainly find that information, sometimes even free of cost on the internet. And I think this is one of the areas that the young generation really cares about, is that transparent data sharing for tracked space objects between different stakeholders. So we really do promote and provide for this. And if you're interested, I can put you in touch with people that do advocate for transparent space debris data sharing. But yeah, just add that. Thanks.
Yeah, you're right. Actually, the TLE is which is not may not be that accurate, but reasonably accurate, is freely available. You are absolutely right. So yeah,
And
you can add.
yes, I would also like to add that there would also be space debris removal private organizations engaged in doing the debris removal. Maybe you could also check on those companies if you're actually interested. I am not sure if they already have the technology to put those space junk in a black hole, but there are actually other technology tools on this debris removal. Thank you.
I think it's more about propulsion to take the object to, I don't know how far the back it is. But
Right. Now we are talking about what do you call graveyard orbits. We have reached up to that only. Yeah. Now another question I really didn't understand, but I'll read anyway. Mohammed Iftikhar Yazdani, Hamza. I think it is directed to you, Hamza. There are Pakistani companies with solutions for space debris. With the advent of national space policy in Pakistan in last December, the solution is available for commercial avenues.
Thanks for that question, Iftikhar. It's good to hear from you. I think this is what I was talking about, right? I think countries all around the world need to put forward progressive space policies and strategies that keep sustainability in mind. I was personally very happy to read the Pakistani national space policy that got released last December because it does prioritize space sustainability and encourages satellite companies to think about space from a sustainable perspective. I think technology providers in Pakistan or any country for that matter should definitely work directly with their space agency and with their domestic regulator to understand the types of licenses and permits that they'd require to operate a commercial space debris solution. And this is not normally the most straightforward process given the specific types of licensing and regulatory requirements that involve the whatever space debris solution a company might be offering. So for example, some solutions might be categorized as dual use, which makes their licensing and regulatory regimes much more complicated and challenging. So I know that the national space policy in Pakistan is only designed as a base on top of which additional policy and regulatory tools will be developed by the various ministries. And so I'm sure they're already thinking of the licensing and regulatory tools that they need to deploy for space debris in particular. Yeah, but happy to talk afterwards about this.
Okay, there is one more question from Dennis Afonso again. It's directed to you, Hristina. He's asking, just now I only mentioned graveyard orbit. He's talking about, has ECSL conducted any studies about using the graveyard orbit?
Yes, maybe very briefly to check if I'm audible. So basically at ECSL we do not conduct especially technical studies ourselves, but I would encourage you, if you look into the ESA environmental report, which is released yearly by our colleagues in the Space Debris Office, because they do actually they do mention and talk a lot about also the graveyard orbit and different types of orbits and how they recommend and feasibility from technical perspective on how to deal with those things. So I think there you might find more interesting things. And if you want to discuss that input, I think then you come to to us. So that's the step process. Yeah. So it's freely available online. ESA environmental report. I would just encourage you to look it up.
Yeah, just to add what he has specifically asked, because I think he is more interested as a technical person, the way he is asking the questions. One thing which is noted is the for example, if you're talking about a spacecraft which is becoming defunct, especially in the geo orbit kind of scenario, the design of the satellite should be already in such a way that it has enough capability to reach the graveyard orbit. Otherwise, it is pretty difficult to send them to graveyard orbit. So now it is, as per the latest guidelines, it is mandatory that when you make the new satellites, this capability should be built in. So once that is built in, always we can decide before the end of the life of the spacecraft or whatever it is, you can propel it to the graveyard orbit and park it. So that is definitely possible. Some people are already doing that. So maybe just for your information. There is another question from Mohammed Iftikhar Yazdani. Who would own the debris being captured by a private company of a country A of a debris from a government space agency of country B? Is it time bound?
I think this is a great question and really something that space lawyers have been debating for decades, I would say. I think people are well aware of this concept within the registration convention that and the Outer Space Treaty, which dictates this idea of once a launching state, always a launching state, right? So once a satellite or a space object is registered by a particular state on the UN's registry, that state serves as the launching state for that particular object. Now, if that object's become defunct and is now a piece of debris, it still is the responsibility of the launching state that put it into orbit. And so it's in the interest of that state to ensure that the object safely deorbited or removed. And I think that's the sort of motivation or incentive that states would have to contract with companies that would then work with them to sort out the liabilities and the indemnifications for such an agreement. And then what happens to the wreck, I think that's a commercial question that the company and the state can address amongst themselves. But yeah, I see Aya and Giovanni have their hands up. So yeah, I'll stop there. Thanks.
Yeah, please continue, Giovanni.
Yeah,
I think
I'm just
I
sorry,
think
go ahead.
Aya raise her hand first.
Yeah,
Okay,
sorry.
Aya, please.
Yeah, all right.
I would just like to add that not only launching state, there is also discussion of the country that has jurisdiction and control over the object. So I think these are the states that could have potential of the owner. But in any case, technically at legal international law level, it's a state who owns the space object, even if it's run by space commercial operators. Go ahead, Giovanni.
Yeah. Yes, I think Hamza mentioned about the Outer Space Treaty and the Registration Convention. I would also like to add about the Rescue Agreement, because the full title of the Rescue Agreement is actually Agreement on Rescue of Astronauts, the Return of Astronauts, and the Return of Objects Launched into Outer Space. So there is this section in that agreement where it tackles about objects returning to Earth. So I think there's a procedure there if the country or the launching state or the party, if the country is a party to that agreement. So you could also check on that agreement. Right. That's all for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Iftaker has asked one more question. Would starting a space debris recycling organization require global permission? Yeah, go, Aya, please go ahead.
Yes, I know there could be numbers of legal discussion, but I'm just going to share with you is the sort of practical solutions under the Japanese domestic regulation. Well, I mentioned that there is a on-orbit servicing guidelines that is applied for taking a mission license from Japan. And in these guidelines, basically, government of Japan requires commercial operators to get a consent from the owner of the space debris or space object to provide the service, whatever it is, either active debris removal or repurposing or recycling or whichever purpose. So I think this is kind of a practical solution to this answer. I know there could be numbers of international legal discussion if you would like that. Thank you.
Anybody else would like to add on to this? Okay. There is one more question. Kibro Weber. Are there countries, space agencies that have already initiated space debris collection?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think ESA is a good example. They've conducted several missions that have tried to and are working on capturing their existing pieces of space debris. I think Japan's a great other example. So they're both in the room, so I'll be quiet.
Hristina, would you like to add?
Yes, maybe just a quick note from my side. Exactly. So ESA is currently, especially in the context of its space safety program, developing or trying to even develop the market in Europe for in-orbit servicing as well, and trying to go forward with missions related to also active debris removal. but that is something that is especially now very highly debated, as also ESA engages with the industry in the sector and tries to procure this service for its own pieces of space debris. So ESA is trying to remove its own pieces of debris in orbit, and as already mentioned before, exactly, even if it's debris, it's still, we know it's ours in that sense. Our colleagues track it. We know that we're supposed to, you know, try to bring it down if possible. So in that sense, even then, for instance, if a private company, because let's say a piece of debris or satellite, something is owned by, so it's owned by ESA, we register it also, and we notify the UN about it, and then we will most likely procure the service from a company that is not, so we're not going to do it ourselves. We will have a certain commercial company that will take the piece of debris. It will then still, in the end, be ESA's space piece of debris. So it will not, the company does not automatically absorb it in that sense, just because they might grab it, or however else technically possible or technical solution will then be. Sorry, Aya.
Aya, you can add.
Yes, and Hamza kindly pointed out the Japan's JAXA's efforts. I would like to add UK Space Agency also has an ADR program, and I think CNES might have. So there are numbers of space agency that try to work on space remediation parts.
Let me also add that India has also started. I would like to add that point. Anyway, I think we have time only for a couple of questions only now. I think Carolina will excuse me for that. We have one question from Bruno Atela. Much was said, particularly yesterday, about cooperation not only between state actors but also involving private companies. How to better incentivize private companies for this cause without straight up force them by unilaterally made law. So make them do it by themselves without coercion. That is the suggestion. Yeah, I think Giovani, you would like to answer.
Yes, I think I'm not thinking about incentivizing, because I think we could do provide incentives in domestic legislation, but we could actually include the private companies in the discussions, in the dialogues, because most of the time it's just the states talking about this, but maybe it could also be a good opportunity for them to bring them forward and include them in the discussions of this debris, so that they would know the repercussions, they would be more aware, and they could also provide solutions on their end. So I think that's one possibility in including the private companies in this cause. I think Aya and Hamza here also raised their hand. Yeah.
Thank you. I was just, in fact, it's a merit and benefit for commercial companies to, operate sustainably in that sense. And I just like to share that there are numbers of voluntary best practices developed by commercial operators, such as the, WEF recently issued a recommendation in space debris mitigation, and also Space Safety Coalition has its own best practices, and I think GSOA also issued a kind of similar, and the Paris Peace Forum has zero debris. Sorry, I forgot the specific term. And also, Hristina can know well that ESA Debris Charter is also the process that involves the commercial company. So there is an interest from the commercial side. It's very important to bring everyone together in the discussion to develop our norms and best practices. Thank you.
Yeah. Any more comments from others? Hristina or Hamza would like to add?
Yeah, I think if I could just build on that, and this time from my private sector perspective, there are lots of tools that governments are now starting to deploy to encourage private companies to think more proactively about space sustainability and space debris. These include tools such as licensing requirements that ensure that space companies that have a certain vision towards sustainability or deorbiting are able to pass through regulatory hurdles in a much more faster way. these include financial incentives, such as, for example, the UK Space Agency is presently considering reducing the insurance requirements for space companies that are operating spacecraft at a certain sustainability level, to then also looking at private sector investment types of incentives, whereby investors would invest more readily or with lower premiums into space companies that rank highly on sustainability metrics. At the same time, I think Aya hinted towards this, but the World Economic Forum recently launched a space sustainability rating, which is a program that allows companies to acquire a particular ranking for their activities, which could then be a tool to incentivize investors to lend money or finance these companies at a lower rate. So I think there's lots of regulatory, compliance, and financial incentives that governments are looking towards at the moment to make sure that sustainability is thought of by design rather than debris being looked at as a problem to fix later.
Yeah. Fine. Hristina?
Yes, exactly. I don't want to add too much, but I already said it. Basically, the zero debris charter and the whole approach, the idea was to involve the industry from the beginning. And I think that is something that on the international fora, where usually just member states discuss, they are of course then tasked with going back to their industry and discussing with them unilaterally, so in their own kind of private forum. But in this situation, it was really the possibility to put both the member states and the industry in one room. And there, of course, there was many synergies and things to get in from the political perspective, but you could see that the discussion was constructive. And then in the end, you could not say that industry does not want it. They were actually more active even in the discussion, because maybe they are, in a sense, they're, of course, they have the possibility to discuss maybe more freely than a government has, which is of course clear, but they were not opposed to the idea from the beginning. They were actually very actively participating. So I think that also shows that if you give the opportunity, then it is also taken up on. Of course, supplemented by the governmental initiatives, which are rising, and they're really great to give also industry that push. So I think altogether it adds to the whole picture.
Thank you, and I think all the questions are exhausted now. So first of all, let me thank all the participants for wonderful presentation, as well as I think we had a very active, interactive session. Also, some very nice questions, very nice suggestions, which some of them we never thought of. Kind of questions have come up. I think that really sums up that these discussions have been listened very carefully by the audience, and also I think it is very fruitful that some interesting thought process has come out. So once again, let me thank Aya Iwamoto, Giovani Concepcion, Hristina Talkova, and Hamza Hamid for making this session so interesting and alive. So with this, I hand over to Carolina for your final words. Over to Carolina.
Thank you so much, Dr. Umamaheswaran, for your steady guidance of the session. And thank you so much also to you, dear speakers, for so excellently sharing your views and experiences on space debris. And thank you for your kind words towards the Portuguese Space Agency. And this was such an intense and wonderful session that we could go home right now and have much to consider upon, like on orbit servicing, on debris removal, and the trust and development of the state-of-the-art technical practices that can enable best practices, guidelines, or norms. The call regarding space debris falling on Earth and the related action protocols. The importance of self-abiding policies and regulations aimed to mitigation and remediation at ultimate zero debris result. The importance of the development of norms to minimize the actual threat that space debris poses, and the urgent need to mitigation and the incorporation of these concerns as soon as the design phase, and also the inherent merit for companies to develop all of these best practices and sustainability ratings. But we still are going to have a bit more debris and other insights. At 12 o'clock sharp, Nicholas Hedman will be moderating the second session of the day with Vinaya Iolia, Aurélie Tour, Tiago Soares, Fateya Ali Al-Sarraj, and Robin Bucks. So let me thank you all again, dear panelists, dear Dr. Umamaheswaran, for this wonderful session. Thank you so much. And until the next session at 2:12 UTC sharp. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Thank you very
everyone.
much.
Bye.
Take care. Good day.
Take care.